Hello everyone, my name is Al Nichols, and of course, this is my first attempt at trying to produce some web content in video format. I've done plenty of content in the past. I've written plenty of blogs on my website at alnichols.com, which goes along with a photo diary. I like to do kind of like old school magazine editorial shoots. And of course, I did a podcast for many years called the Elemental Podcast, which had a small following, not really. The only thing that I actually haven't gotten my hands really dug deep into in quite some time is actually video, which is bizarre. I spent almost 10 years producing commercial video for a variety of different businesses, a lot of church organizations at that time. I'll get into that in a moment. But I did a lot of video work in my past. And so I think at one point I got burnt out with it, decided that it really wasn't for me. And that's absurd. Video is in my blood. It's what I like doing. I like creating content for the web. But I was very uncomfortable actually doing this with myself in front of a camera talking, right? Because I have a tendency to ramble, and always an issue in my past of feeling very self-conscious, which sitting here now, kind of finally getting to this point, doesn't seem so much of a big deal anymore. It's amazing how you change over time and you still let these little fears and things kind of conquer you, and then you realize one day like, oh, I'm not really intimidated like that about how I thought I used to be. And so anyway, here we are, going to get right into this, trying to figure out what to record. That was kind of a challenge, but it became very clear when someone gave me the idea that I shouldn't be trying to do a Q&A on my blog, which I was trying to do briefly. It's called Queeries. I missed an opportunity though when I wrote that name, when I came up with it. I should have gone with 2 E's. My best fiend Megan made that very clear to me, so we're rectifying that right now. This is Queeries with 2 E's, where you ask me questions and I provide the answers to those questions, or the most closest thing I can come up to try to reply back to many of you. To start this off, actually about 2 weeks ago on Facebook, I reached out to my friends and I asked them, guys, what do you want me to talk about? I've answered stuff in the past, but what do you want me to talk about here in this first video? And of course, I have a good friend named Jean Marie who decided to give me such a great idea. And that idea was talk about the top 10 things you would go back and tell your teenage self. And that was a heavy one. That was actually one of the best questions I've ever been asked. It has something that, I think a lot of us will kind of consider from time to time, because it is one of those things about like, I would have wished I had known this when I was this age, because I would have gone back and I would have changed things. And it's an opportunity to get your life back on the right track, right? Because we go through life and we make a lot of mistakes. We fall into many pits, and it's hard to get ourselves out of them sometimes. But it's also a necessity. I don't really live my life with regrets. I'm 32 years old, so me being a teenager was like almost half my life ago now. And when I think about, all the years that have followed that, it became very easy and very clear what kind of advice that I needed to give. Now, I didn't want to do the Doc Brown approach about like, you need to go and fix your kids, but I was thinking about like, what advice did I really need to hear at an early age? Me being a genderqueer person, dealing with a lot of identity issues and trying to figure out who I was as a person, there was just some advice that wasn't available beyond 10 years ago. The idea of being transgender wasn't something that was even socially... Is it possible that only in the last year that has actually become a national conversation? Look, we have a lot of things that are currently being moved to the forefront. That's great. But when I was a kid, none of this was available. I just thought I was a cross-dresser, right? Like this was some sort of fetish. And when I would go online, that was the only communities I would find too, because those people didn't know much about their own identities either. And over time, once more information started to become available and I started to get a little bolder and live my life, things became a little clear. So I don't want to keep babbling on here. We'll talk much more about this in future episodes here of this video series on Queeries. But here on this episode, let's get right down to that top 10 list. Number 1, you are allowed to be beautiful. That's not something I heard very often when I was growing up. I don't think that's something that most boys hear when they're growing up. And I think that's changing. I think there's a lot of things that are happening today where people feel more comfortable to use that terminology and also to express feminine attributes to males, because things are starting to kind of get torn down. Even department stores are trying to not identify something as masculine or feminine, but make it just for everybody, which I think is the way it should be. And so that was something that I really needed to hear as a child, because at an early age, back to my earliest memories, I remember feeling a deep desire to want to express something feminine in my identity. And in my ego, as it was forming, only grew more and more over time. And so I was raised by my grandmother and my grandfather. My grandfather, for the most part, was an atheist. He didn't really believe in God, but my grandmother was on the other end of that spectrum. She was a spirit-filled, born-again believer. Well, not the spirit part at first, that would come later, but she was sanctified, is a word that they used to like to use. We were in church all the time, and so it was very difficult for me to sometimes express the things that I wanted to, and it wasn't always a problem up until about the age of 5, when I did something that I guess crossed the line and my grandmother let me know it. At an early age, I had a fascination with nylons or tights, pantyhose, whatever you want to call them. I hate pantyhose. But anyway, it was something that kind of grew from superheroes, like they all kind of wore them, and Wonder Woman, of course, and I idolized all these superheroes. They were a major interest to me. And so not only that, then fashion magazines would be around my house. And when I saw other women and they were getting to express this thing that for whatever reason wasn't an option for me, I looked at them and I thought that they were superheroes. I associated it all kind of together. And so I wanted to try on a pair. So one particular Sunday, my grandmother had left a brand new pair laid out in her bed. It was just so tempting, so I grabbed them, took them back to my bedroom, and put them on. Well, in doing that, my grandmother definitely noticed. I thought I was being sly and very sneaky and gonna get away with it, but that did not happen. My grandmother busted open the door. Some people would call it spanking. This wasn't spanking. This actually went way too far. And she made it very clear during this scenario that what I had done was perverted and that Jesus didn't allow perverts into heaven. That's kind of a heavy thing for a 5-year-old child to be hearing, and it left a scar, a very, very deep scar and a lot of trauma. And that would carry on in almost every experience that would follow when I would feel this feminine desire and want to express that, want to experiment, want to do the things that you should do actually when you're a child. Finding out who you are as a person, I felt ashamed of that. And it started at that moment and went forward. And so I didn't feel like it was okay to be beautiful. My grandmother had told me that Jesus told me that it was not okay. And it was a big mess. And so that's the way I felt most of my life. A lot of that started to get undone by my own mother. Once I started living with her around the age of 10, things started to change. My mom was majorly into fashion. And, it's not that she understood all this stuff. Like, it would come out over the years. There would be moments where I'd be caught doing something and, my mom, she wouldn't overreact. She wouldn't fly off the handle. At first I thought that she was going to disown me and treat me in the way that my grandmother had, which made me feel unloved by her and that love was always going to be in question, because if I did something wrong, then that may put me in a bad situation. But that never happened with my mom. My mom was completely loving, and while she had faith, she definitely had a relationship with God. She never went to that extreme. And that was very important, because over that time, she started to kind of rebuild a lot of things in my life. I was filled with a lot of stuff because of the years that I lived with my grandmother, who wasn't a bad person, mind you, but just misguided in a lot of different ways. And so my mom started to kind of rebuild me as a person. And it would take me up into my 20s to be okay with the fact that it's okay to be beautiful. And even beyond that, it's okay to be a bombshell. I don't think a lot of people really kind of understand that. Like, it is absolutely okay to be a knockout, because why not? And beauty, of course, is more than just skin deep. It is in the inside. But I believe when you find that beauty on the inside, you can find beauty inside yourself. It naturally becomes part of your surface as well. It's a perfect marriage, a harmony that begins to grow from the inside. That's why you don't spend all the time on the outside. You have to spend and focus it internally. So that was something that I began to learn then. It is a fundamental, important life lesson that I know today, and that is why I have no problem sitting here in front of the camera looking my very best. Number 2, be careful who you share your dreams with. Too many times in my past, I would share what I wanted to do. I want to be a filmmaker, I want to be an artist, I want to be a writer. And people are very, very good at throwing up obstacles. Well, that's a great thing you should want to be. Just, so many people don't make it. Or, you're never going to be that, you don't have the talent for it. I've read your writing, it's not that good. I've had it all. I've had it all happen. And no matter what area I went into, I always made the mistake of telling people what I wanted to do. Now, it's not a bad thing. There are some people you should share with. Safe people. People that you build a relationship with. And they're going to help build you up. And I think that's really important. But I would tell people who I didn't know too well or had kind of burned me in the past. And they would constantly remind me of what I couldn't achieve. I was a dropout by the age of 15. And that was because of circumstances at home. And it made me feel really bad about myself. Like I didn't feel like I actually had a future or that I wasn't unintelligent, like a complete idiot. I just was not interested in school. So actually me getting out of school ended up being a good thing. Because the thing was, even though there were plenty of people around telling me what my potential was limited to, I found that they were wrong in most cases and that there was always another path that I could take. There's not one way to achieve something. So I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to basically work on my computer and use the canvas and the tools that I was most skilled and comfortable with. And I figured out a way to make that happen. And I don't think anyone looks at my art today and says that it's a piece of crap. And if they do, well, they can go screw themselves because I know they're wrong. But, I've spent a lot of years mastering things and figuring things out and always looking for opportunities to trade ignorance for knowledge. And admitting when I don't know something, because that's so important. But the first step always is making sure you guard your secrets, guard your heart. Because if you don't, so many people are going to give you 1,000 reasons why you can accomplish something. And if you're not careful, you'll start believing that stuff. So it's important always to share what's most personal with the people who you know can guard it and you can trust it with. Number 3, do something every day that makes you afraid. This was something I started kind of doing a few years ago. And, I started noticing that I was so sick of my limitations. Like, why don't I go do something? I would already kind of rule things out because it made me uncomfortable. Like, I didn't go clubbing because I was kind of afraid to dance. Now, that's crazy today because if you put me in a club, I'm going to dance. I'm going to dance my ass off. But, there's so many things, though, that I prevented myself from doing because I was afraid of it. And I started to figure this out. The things you're afraid of the most is usually the things that you need to do. Because they're obstacles that you just have to, hurdles even, that you have to jump over, you have to get past. And yeah, it's scary when you do things. I mean, today what I like to do, one thing that I like to do on a daily basis, is I like to find something in my wardrobe that I'm kind of scared of. Something that I bought, maybe on a whim, because I was feeling mischievous or a little scandalous even. And I wear that, and I'll go out and wear it in public. Maybe it's sometimes way too dressy, or sometimes it's just absolutely crazy. But I like to do that because it's me stretching myself, me kind of overcoming the idea of maybe what I should be, how I should dress. But at the end of the day, even if it's something I decide that's not for me at the end of it all, right? If it's that experience of trying something on new and going out into public and feeling, flushed in the face for a little while, there's something that I always take away from all those experiences. And a lot of times, you actually end up inspiring a lot of people. That's the one thing I found to be the most bizarre. You always expect judgment and ridicule. In my case, I've always found acceptance, love, and kindness. And so when I go out into public and I do that, it's always kind of an energizing thing. One thing about myself that I know, and it is part of being a creative, you kind of beg for attention, right? It's not something that everyone does. A lot of people could take it or leave it. But for me, I do like attention. And the thought of going out into public and people forgetting my face and not remembering me almost feels like a crime. And it's not because I feel like, everyone has to see me or I have to be some sort of like exploitive circus act walking down the street. But I just feel like it's important that I leave a lasting impression. That's just something that I need. And so by doing this, by overcoming my fears, I found a way to do that and always basically live an interesting life. So always finding something that you're afraid of and overcoming it is never a bad way to live your life. Number 4 is going to be a little controversial because I'm sure a lot of people would absolutely disagree with this, but live every day as if it was your last. Now, I know that's a strange statement, and I'm not talking about financial responsibilities and doing things that are completely stupid. In fact, actually, I think if you really thought about it, sometimes people think, oh, I know this is my last day on earth, I'm going to blow all my money, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I think actually when you put thought into it, you end up not doing any of those things. What becomes important to you are the things that actually mattered. You know, blowing all your money on something, what does that actually really achieve? It is nice knowing that, you know, maybe you don't have to pay any more bills, or maybe there's something that was going to happen at the end of the month that you didn't want to do. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think when you think about the end of your life, which I know sounds very morbid, but I'm kind of a dark person naturally. But for me, I feel like when you actually think about how you want to live your last day, it's kind of more about like leaving your mark, leaving behind the things you want to leave behind, seeing the people that you want to see, and doing the things that you absolutely know you need and want to do. I go out every day and I think about the things that I love to do. I love creating art, and I love telling stories, and I love being interactive with people. I love spending time with my best fiend and of course my family and those people who are important to me. They're always on my mind, and I always try to do something special every single day and keep every day almost, you know, like a way of leaving behind a piece of myself, you know, and I always even try to dress my best. Because I could go out and I could wear whatever, but for me it's important, you know, it's like leaving behind that mark. And it's not just the superficial stuff, of course, you know, it's the impression you left on people. That's something I feel like is important to live every day. And so there's lessons and thoughts that you can have when you know something is coming to an end. And let's be honest, do we really have a guarantee about tomorrow? So why not live today the very best that we possibly can? Make it a great day. Make it memorable. Make it for the books. Number 5, never be too proud to accept help. That is something that took me so long to finally break down and just admit that I'm not capable of doing everything myself. I was very self-reliant at an early age, had to be, you know, once I was living with my mother, you know, single mother living in California, a very expensive area. We struggled a lot, and it meant that I had to take care of myself in more situations than a child probably should be asked to take care of themselves. But that's this world, that's the place we live in. And so I got very used to taking care of myself. As the years went on and I finally got into adulthood, you get to the point where you think that you can handle everything. You don't want to go running back to your family and asking for help. You know, even when you have to, you don't want to do that. And so I found so many ways of trying to avoid that. Not letting anyone help me because I saw that as a crutch, and even when that was offered, I would deny it. And, you know, that was a bad move on my part. You know, sometimes, yes, it builds something inside of you, and it gives you the ability to, you know, trust yourself, and that's wonderful. But you don't often get offers for help in this world. When they come along, it's important to understand that that's precious and that you shouldn't just ignore it. I think there has to be some consideration. And I also think you have to understand that you accepting help doesn't make you a lesser person, doesn't make you inadequate or a failure. You accepting help is actually you understanding that you're part of something bigger than yourself. And that help is something that when you take, you are also doing something for another person. Because when a person gives, it's also a very powerful act. So it's something I wish I knew earlier on. It is something I've gotten very good at in my life in the last 10 years. It's something that I am very good in practicing myself and offering it to other people. Because that's the thing. When you receive help down the road, you will ultimately give it as well. The world would be a much better place if people tried to help each other once in a while. So always accept it when it's offered, or at least strongly consider it, and don't be too proud to say yes. Number 6, always find other perspectives. There's a lot of different perspectives in this world. You actually have a very unique one that no one else has. And that's all cultivated from your experiences, what you've done in your life, the things you've witnessed. All of this builds up into a worldview that you are certain is absolutely correct. The problem is we get too entrenched in the fact that we think that we know how the world works best, and that's why everyone has a different opinion about what needs to be changed and what can be done. When you share your perspective and you adopt another person's perspective, it basically is a way of expanding your very, very narrow mind view of this world. And so you start to bring in other people's ideas, their feelings, their emotions. You do that by getting to know people, opening yourself up to new ideas and new concepts. And I also think it's really important to have fewer beliefs and more ideas. I'm not saying don't have your religious beliefs, but I'm also saying that not everything should be set in stone. Everything should always be flexible, because if something comes along and is a better idea and actually stands the test that come up against it, even against your own reasoning and logic, shouldn't that replace the old ideas? And I think that is very strong in religion too, and it's actually something that over time we can see is proven that we have done, even though today everyone would like to think that we still hold the biblical laws absolutely solid, or whatever law it may be. But in fact, those things change over time. There's a great deal we actually don't practice today. Why? Because at some point humanity grew up and decided that killing people for petty things, or not giving people a fair chance, or doing cruel acts to other people, selling people into slavery, these weren't things that we wanted to do any longer. As a society, as a species, we made a decision that we want to live a better life than that. We want to leave something behind that's better. We don't always reach that goal, but I think for the most part, throughout the many, many centuries and eons that have come before us, we've tried. And so I think that's something that's important to understand, other people's reality. It will shape your own, because I opened myself up to listen to other people and experience what they went through. It helped me in many of the struggles I had in my own life. It changed the way that I looked at politics, or I looked at social issues, or a variety of other things. And not just desperately wanting to argue those points. Now, sometimes people shared things with me and I understood where they were coming from. I just ultimately didn't agree with it, because I felt that where I was coming from actually stood a better all around, I guess. I don't really know what else to say there. But, I just felt some things were a little bit more solid for me than the ideas that they presented. And that's fine. And sometimes when you hear other people out and you hear what they have to say, you can actually understand where they're coming from, and if you know for a fact, because of proof and other things, you can actually begin to present those evidences with kindness and love. And so that is what I try to practice in my life, is always adopting new perspectives and always offering out my own. Number 7, your vulnerability is not your weakness, it's your strength. Being vulnerable is not a bad thing. And around the wrong people, it can be. People are cruel. And when I was a kid, there was a lot of bullying. Because I wasn't necessarily looking like this, but people could detect that there was something different about me, that there was something not quite lined up with the way everyone else seemed to be. And so I got bullied and tortured and mistreated, and it was a constant cycle, and it caused a lot of different mental conditions, things that took me years to get past. But, I built up walls. And that's why it took me so long to even finally come out of the closet, 7 years ago, and start to go through that process of rebuilding my life, actually figuring out who the hell I was, and tearing down these false constructs of identity that actually wasn't real. And that was part of my defense, building up a fake layer, right? Problem is, when you put yourself amongst all these different walls, you can't grow, you limit yourself. And I was a 25-year-old person who found that I was incapable of experiencing love, being real with people, sharing my life. I was always trying to hide myself. The best equation I could say was, it was kind of like having a conjoined twin. And almost said Siamese, and I just did. But it's like having a conjoined twin, and you're ashamed of your twin, and you put a blanket on top of your twin and hope nobody notices. That was my life. It's a miserable way to live, and I did that for far too long. I'm glad, though, that I eventually got out of that. I'm glad I am where I am today. So what I'm trying to say is vulnerability is a powerful thing. yes, you're going to get stabbed. You're going to have people come and give you cheap shots, and you're going to get mistreated. Guess what? That's your contract for living. That's just what the price is for being a human being. The goal is to be vulnerable enough to open yourself up to people around you who love you, who care about you, who want to protect you. They become your defense. And they're the ones who help you heal and grow during times of difficulty and when you're under attack or persecution. So I tear down the walls, right? In a lot of ways, when I even think about like my feminine attire, when I think about wearing dresses and stuff like that, in a way that's me kind of definitely tearing down my defenses and taking off my armor and being vulnerable to the world for their slings and arrows and missiles and whatever other deathly devices they have to want to try to fire at me. But I know that there's a support system, there's people around me who won't let me suffer, won't let me die, won't let me get too injured. Number 8 is rebel a little. It's something that most kids do. They rebel, right? They don't like what their parents are trying to make them do or constrict them in some way. We go through those awkward teenage years where I think the role of the parent should become more of a mentor, a guiding force, but often it stays the same role as it was when you were a little child, telling you what to do, giving you a curfew, doing all those things. And it's to protect you, of course. They love you. They want to make sure that you're okay and that you have proper guidelines. But sometimes it goes a little too far, and you can't really control a person who's going into adulthood. If you do, well, we see what happens in your 20s. You go out of control. You don't know how to pay your taxes, or you don't know how to even keep a job because you're not been prepared for adulthood. That's why rebellion is the response that we have. And that was something that I desperately needed. Being a teenager, I was unfortunately too well behaved. I was in a very, very crazy religious environment. There was a time in those years when my mom found Jesus again, and we started going to a church that was pretty much a cult. In a lot of ways, I'm not saying the people were bad. I'm not even saying the people who were in charge of it were bad people. But the beliefs were a little too far gone in a lot of cases, so I'll talk about it more in the future. But anyway, because of being in that environment, everything was very restrictive. And a lot of the things that a teenager could do, I was already a high school dropout, so I wasn't actually getting to be a part of those very milestone things that those tentpole events that happen in your life. That just wasn't happening for me. And beyond that, then I wasn't allowed to go see a variety of different movies for stupid, ridiculous reasons. I wasn't allowed to hang out with people. I was spending all my time in church, either volunteering or actually attending a service. And so these things were things that I didn't feel comfortable with. I didn't feel like this is what I wanted to do with my time. I wanted to be able to control just a little piece of my life. But I was too afraid to kind of stand up against my mother and against my grandmother, who would eventually move out here as well, and then even my aunt. All these people, there was 3 strong women, and I felt like I had no voice to speak up against that. In reality, I did. I had it all along. I just needed to say, no, this is bullshit, I don't want to do this, and get in trouble a little bit for even doing something like that, because it would have allowed me to basically build some muscle to be able to do that a little bit later. As I got into my career and I started doing a lot of graphic design work, it was a little hard for me to confront clients because I had never built up that ability to stand up for myself and to say, no, this is unjust, I don't want to do this, or I don't feel like it, right? And so I would get stepped on all the time by clients, and I would have to hire people on to manage my clients. So it was a very rough start for me, and something that I still even deal with today, just an intimidation factor. But being able to rebel as a teenager, being able to stand up for yourself, say what you want to say and believe and do the things that you want to do, it's so fundamental. You have to take those reins into your hands, and sometimes you're just not going to like what your parent is trying to make you do. It feels completely contrary to the person that you are, and it gets really, really complicated when you're talking about religious beliefs. And that was something I felt like I had to practice. I had to practice Christianity. I had to believe everything that was being presented to me. In reality, that wasn't the case. I didn't have to do any of that. So it is something that I encourage a lot of people to do. Not to completely rebel against your parents for the most mundane, stupidest things, but There are occasions where you need to say, no, I'm taking a stand against this, and I'm not going to do it. Number 9, know your value. We are made to feel like very valueless individuals, like no one's really special. If you actually go out there and say you want to do something, people start to think, well, that's really lofty. Who do you think you are? Some sort of special savant or whatever? You know, you start to feel like the world is against your specialness. And that is something that you have to combat. You have to come against that. Because in this case, the majority is wrong. See, people kind of are trying to justify the reasons why they don't do certain things in their life. And they like to take out that animosity on people who are brave enough to express what they actually want to do, which is why I said number 2 was be careful who you share with. But when you do finally share with the world what you wanted to create, you're going to get a lot of those people who think that you are, you just think now you're better than everyone else. Well, you followed your dreams and you did something that was important. You know, I don't like to call it being better than other people because I think that creates this idea that, you know, like a class of person or whatever, and we can get into a lot of different issues when you're talking about that. But it's not about measuring yourself against everyone else. It is okay for you to be a fan of what you do and to like it and to feel good about it. You don't have to live in some sort of false remorse for being talented or for be daring and brave enough to go into something that a lot of people didn't have or couldn't actually muster up those vital things to go and do themselves. So you don't have to be apologetic about that. You don't have to be, falsely humble in those particular situations, even though it's, false humility, and there's a difference between that and actually being genuinely humble. Like, you don't want to go then boast it up and throw it in other people's faces, but it is okay to be proud of your efforts and the things that you've achieved. And more now than ever, people like to tear each other down. Seriously, why is it a bad thing to think you're good at what you do? I understanding your limitations and your weaknesses so you can improve and grow, but to be torn down I don't think helps anyone grow. It doesn't help you grow, and it doesn't actually help in any way in your life. Sometimes it's best to understand where your strengths are and to be proud of them and always work to be better. Number 10, never drink cheap wine. That is such a very true statement. It was actually suggested to me by my best friend Megan. But I think that goes to something a little bit deeper. Sometimes it's okay to embrace your vices. We all have things we love to do that aren't necessarily healthy for us. Whatever that may be. For me, I used to drink Coke all the time. Far too much. Having a Coca-Cola was like the ultimate thing for me, right? Because it's a sugar addiction. You know, it has cornstarch in it and everything else, or corn sugar or whatever. And it's very bad for your health. It is something that every once in a while I'll indulge in, and I'll have one because I enjoy it. You know, it's okay to do that every once in a while. I know we live in a world where it's like completely expunge everything that's bad for you, but then you don't enjoy things as much. If you're constantly on a diet and you don't get to enjoy some like very savory foods and very fatty foods or cheesy, I don't know, you just miss out on something. You can live your life in 2 ways. You can be living for quantity or you can be living for quality. Some people say the two aren't mutually exclusive, and I think that could be true, but you know, I think that I don't want to just live to be the oldest person from my generation still around. There's actually a lot of things about that are very unappealing. Being the last one at a party is the way I like to equate it. And while that seems nice to some people, and if that is what you want, then please, by all means. But for myself, I'm not thinking so much about when my expiration date is, but I'm thinking about the time in between. If I don't take a moment to enjoy certain things as I go along, then why am I trying to get to the end? So that's my advice on that. Do what you feel sometimes you need to do. Like if you need to kick back, you need to do something that's maybe not the best for you, that's okay. So that is it for this first video. Thank you so much for sitting here and enduring my long babbling. We will be doing this weekly from now on here going forward, and I'm going to try to get a better setup as we do. But thank you so much again for sticking in here with me. If you want to go check out my website, lnichols.com is the place where my photo diary and a variety of other things are listed, some of my old podcasts. And of course, if you want to check out my artwork, that's alluded.co. And yes, I do portrait work for people. For rates and availability, please email me at l@lnichols.com, which will also be listed below. Guys, thank you so much for joining me, and as always, stay extraordinary and escape the ordinary. Goodbye, everybody.